offering free online, on-site, and on-air B-Warp presentations. The Black Wealth Attainment and Retention Programs helps our community acquire, sustain, and pass down legacy wealth. High school seniors can apply for this year's scholarship awards at parksideedc.org. Scholarships will be awarded at Parkside EDC's Gospel/Jazz Brunch on Sunday, April the 27th. For details, tickets, or donations, please visit parksideedc.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., and welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. In the news, the President of the United States is presently delivering a speech before the Department of Justice, literally right now as we speak, live. I was covering that speech and hoping that it would be finished by the time our show began. So I took some copious notes up until the point that our show began. And so the conclusion of the speech I was unable to get, but I can give you a general gist of where it's going. He spent 15 minutes sharing with the Department of Justice the significance and the importance of Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Todd Blanche, and Amir Bourré. The Chief of Staff, Chad Moselle, the head of the DEA, Terry Call, and Senior Counsel to the Civil Rights Enforcement Division, Leo Terrell. The response to these introductions from rank and file Department of Justice officials was as if it were a campaign rally. A campaign rally at the Department of Justice. The arm of the government that's supposed to be unbiased as they bring forward prosecutions, fight crime, and theoretically take into account the idea that there is racial bias in the law, certainly in the prosecution process, the extent to which African Americans are massively incarcerated under the Joe Biden crime bill of 1994. What we know from the reception being received by those at the Department of Justice, it was a campaign rally. And that's unprecedented in any moment in American history. In that introduction, he blamed others for weaponizing the Department of Justice. He talked about Hunter Biden's laptop. He talked about the Department of Justice spying on his campaign, how he was personally persecuted, his office, his staff, how his home was raided in Mar-a-Lago. He called the people who came after him thugs, and he suggested that there must be justice. He said that the Department of Justice has a history of going after Catholics. I find that one particularly curious because the last president of the United States was Catholic, Joe Biden. John F. Kennedy was Catholic. I'm not saying there's not anti-Catholic bias in the nation, but not on the scale that civil rights laws don't already cover it. But he seems to be whipping Christians and Protestants and Catholics into some kind of frenzy that somehow our religious systems those of us who believe in Jesus of Nazareth are under attack. By who? The agnostics? The atheists? The Muslims? The Jews? That requires a particular scrutiny from the Department of Justice. Who is denying anyone in the United States the right to believe in Jesus? And yet people who burn crosses are under absolutely no scrutiny. Burning Christian crosses, preaching hate, threatening African Americans in their civil protests, writing swastikas on synagogues, defacing monuments. There is no evidence that Christianity in the United States is under attack. And it's certainly not a minority religion. It's a majority religion. Justice Department to go after anti-Christian bias. We'll all have to wait and see what that means. He referred to it as the Department of Injustice. But the clapping from the DOJ officials were sycophantic. And that is unusual. Usually during the State of the Union address or even speeches to Congress, you notice that the Supreme Court of the United States keeps its hands closed. They usually don't clap. They usually don't have facial expressions. They usually don't nod or give any forms of approval because they're the interpreters of the Constitution. They're supposed to be above politics. Well, the Department of Justice is supposed to be above politics as well. The weaponization of the Department of Justice is underway. The President of the United States called this his law and order speech. When we come forward, we are going to look closely at the history of law and order and the codes and buzzwords that have been used to undermine justice. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
The revolution will not be televised.
What's up? It is Killer Mike, also known as Michael Render, and I'm encouraging you to listen to more, not less, of Truth Time with Dr. Cornel West and Senator Nina Turner on KBLA Talk 1580.
You can do it all by yourself, baby girl. What's your name? Let me talk to you. Let me buy you a drink.
Spilled your drink? Quick, the quicker picker-upper. Bounty picks up spills quicker, and each sheet is 2 times more absorbent, so you can use less than the leading ordinary brand. So you can get back to your night. Bounty, the quicker picker-upper.
For a limited time at Verizon, you can get our best price ever. That's 4 lines on unlimited welcome for just $25 a line per month with autopay plus taxes and fees. You'll also get the new iPhone 16 Pro, 4 of them for the entire family when you trade in up to 4 phones from our top brands. That's a new phone for everyone, only on the network you can count on. Verizon. Visit a store today. 20 monthly promo credits applied over 36 months with a new line on unlimited welcome. In times of congestion, unlimited 5G and 4G LTE may be temporarily slower than other traffic. Domestic data roaming at 2G speeds. Additional terms apply for phone offer. See Verizon.com for details.
Taxes was feeling so stuck. Sitting in traffic, squeezing into a parking spot, all to squeeze in getting tax help during your lunch break. Now Taxes is a TurboTax expert who does your taxes for you, while you go about your day getting real-time notifications about their progress and the most money back guaranteed. Now this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile apps. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
The following is not a contest and is a paid advertisement by Family Vacation Getaways. Airfare not included. See FVGradio.com for complete details. If you want a 100% complimentary stay at a luxury resort in Cancun, airfare not included, then Family Vacation Getaways is your ticket to paradise. See website for complete details. We're giving away 5 days and 4 nights to the first 50 callers who can name an animal that lays eggs and is not a bird. An animal that lays eggs and is not a bird. Do you know it? Call now, 800-868-6431, 800-868-6431. You're also eligible for an exciting bonus vacation to Orlando, Florida for just $498. And don't worry about anything ruining your plans. We can extend your travel up to 18 months. Name an animal that lays eggs and is not a bird, and get your complimentary Cancun resort stay and an optional bonus vacation to Orlando for just $498. What are you waiting for? Call 800-868-6431, 800-868-6431, and give us your answer. Proceeding is not sponsored by this station or its affiliates.
Heard any other talk radio lately that sounds anything like this? We didn't think so. You're listening to Unapologetically Progressive, KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. In this hour, we're going to be talking about the president's speech before the Department of Justice, in which he titled it Law and Order. But it's impossible for us to have the discussion without at least a 2-minute mention on history and the context. Malcolm X said we were here before Plymouth Rock. That would be 1619. Dr. King said we were here before Jefferson wrote the magnificent words of the Declaration of Independence. That would be 1776, July 4th. So from 1619 to 1776, let's call that the pre-construction of the United States. And then there's the construction of the United States from 1776 to 1861. That includes the writing of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all of which the Negro has no say in. Then there's this process of adding one free and one slave state to the Union up until the entire process of construction falls apart in a deconstruction phase known as the Civil War. That's what I call it. The Union fell apart. Lincoln carefully navigated the politics of race, slavery, freedom, unfreedom to arrive at Gettysburg, to arrive at the idea of the 13th Amendment. With the 13th Amendment, 14th and 15th Amendment, we began a period in American history known as Reconstruction, First Reconstruction. First Reconstruction comes to an end when African-American male voters are making so much progress. African-Americans are growing in the Congress of the United States very, very quickly. The numbers are expanding because Black men have the right to vote, not Black women, until the Tilden-Hayes Compromise, when the federal government takes troops out of the South and turns our people's freedom back over to the states, states' rights, governors, sheriff departments, local police. And then Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, the end of First Reconstruction and the beginning of Jim Crow. Jim Crow, the most violent period in the history of African Americans in this nation, lasted from 1896 to 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education. In the context of Brown versus the Board of Education, when we fast forward all the way to Second Reconstruction and the destruction of the Department of Education, when we think about the death of Emmett Till in 1956, Rosa Parks sitting in 1957, the Montgomery bus boycott. No caller. The Montgomery bus boycott. When we think about the modern civil rights movement, 1964, 65, Voting Rights Act, 1966, the public accommodations legislation. All of this occurs during the Second Reconstruction of our nation, until, of course, the election of Donald Trump and the ushering in of Project 2025, which is quickly returning our nation to a second Jim Crow. Now, that's one way of looking at the history of the nation through the lens of the Negro from 1619 to the present. We were here. We saw how it was constructed. During those phases, we were also Africans. Then we became niggas. Then we became Negroes. Then we became, in fact, if you think about W.E.B. Du Bois, he only uses the word in all of his sociological writings, he'll use the word Negro. That's the only word that's available to him as a scholar and a thinker. The Negro problem, Carter G. Woodson, the miseducation of the Negro. That's the vernacular that they used. And then we go from that to Black Americans, and even Dr. King in his speeches still talking about the Negro in the civil rights movement. Then we go to the consciousness of the late 60s, the early 70s, Black Americans, Black is beautiful, I got Black pride, Black, buy Black, shop Black, think Black. And then, of course, the transition to a kind of global understanding that, you know, we ain't just come out of nowhere, Black representing just empty space. We come from somewhere. We come from a people. We come from Africa. We are African Americans. We're Afro Americans. My father says we ain't no hairdo. So not Afro Americans. We're African Americans. I kind of got that. We're a hybrid of two cultures, two worlds, just like Irish Americans and Italian Americans and Nigerian Americans. Everybody holds on to where they're from, and they add it to the hybrid, the flavor of what it means to be an American. Of course, the modern era wants to redefine America away from our culture. In other words, they not like us. They not like us. They not like us. So that's one way of looking at American history. There's another way of looking at it. And this may be even simpler. It's like an earthquake. From 1619 to 1861, the nation is shaking, tremors. Before a great quake, there are always tremors. There's always some sign of seismic activity. A tsunami's coming, something's coming. And then there's this great quake. Boom! It almost all fell apart. And then that's between 1861 and 1865. And then from 1865 to the present, and I mean every single event, from 1865 to the present, they're tremors, aftershocks. Emmett Till is an aftershock. The Montgomery bus boycott is an aftershock. The I Have a Dream speech is a consequence. It's an aftershock. Shirley Chisholm running for president, it's an aftershock. The founding of the Congressional Black Caucus, it's an aftershock from the Voting Rights Act. The implementation of the 15th Amendment from the end of the Great Quake, it's an aftershock. Jesse Jackson running for president, an aftershock. Barack Obama's election to the presidency, an aftershock. Donald Trump succeeding Barack Obama, an aftershock. Joe Biden's election, an aftershock. Donald Trump's re-election, an aftershock to the great event of just how big and how serious, with searching reappraisal, must we give just how big that earthquake was when the states fell apart. Because the nation has been limping since the Civil War to the present. I set that framework up for you because I want to talk for a few minutes about law and order as a racial buzzword and code words, because the code words are so clear in Second Reconstruction in ways they're not clear in First Reconstruction, and they're not as clear during the Jim Crow era. No one's going to call you a nigger today to your face, quite like they used to, not without real consequences, in real time. So they're code words. On multiple occasions over his 4 years, President Trump claimed he was the president of law and order. He's incorporated this phrase into many tweets, speeches, and campaign messages. In 2016, he ran as the law and order candidate, and he's continuing that strategy into the 2020 campaign and to the present. In fact, in his first presidential debate alone in 2020, Trump talked about law and order over 7 times. However, this broad phrase is not usually followed by any concrete explanation. What is vital to understanding is what it truly means. The phrase law and order has a long history in American politics, beginning in the early 1960s during Barry Goldwater's campaign for president. However, the first time it was used successfully was by former President Richard Nixon during the 1968 presidential election following significant acts of civil unrest. What are those acts of civil unrest? The deaths of John F. Kennedy, his assassination. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., civil unrest. The death of Bobby Kennedy, the Democratic Convention that year. The war in Vietnam, civil unrest. John Lewis crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965, being met by Bull Connor. George Wallace in Georgia, stopping those children from entering that schoolhouse door and needing the federal government to escort Ruby Bridges into that school and how she was treated. The rise of the Ku Klux Klan. Civil unrest. And so the politicians, in response to the death and the reaction to the death of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, 58 our children, a generation of Americans who lost their lives in Vietnam, protests on college campuses, the Flower Children, Jimi Hendrix and his version of the Star Spangled Banner being played on his guitar, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, Curtis Mayfield capturing the moment in sound. The politicians wanted to reestablish order. But the order of normalcy that they wanted was to stop us from protesting, to shut down civil unrest. The bombing of those little girls in Birmingham, social protest by the Ku Klux Klan. So when we hear words like law and order from a president, it almost always points to African Americans. During this time, race riots occurred throughout the country and protests over Vietnam took place across many college campuses in the US. Nixon marketed himself as someone who could uphold the law and restore order to bring the country back to some level of normalcy. Nixon also used this rhetoric to crack down on drug users in America, officially starting the war on drugs in the early 1970s. Many resulting policies largely targeted minority communities. For example, high mandatory minimum sentencing for certain drugs that were used primarily by minorities were put in place, while others had low or no minimum sentences. Crime rates still rose, leading to other policies that are still in place today. And one of the more notable laws enacted during this time is the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, also referred to as the 1994 Crime Bill, which was then led by Senator Joe Biden. The bill changed the nation's punitive landscape, including funding more prisons, more policing, encouraging tougher sentences, and more drug-related arrests, as well as providing more resources to help women in domestic violence and sexual assault cases, and funding background checks for gun buyers. Both this law and many others in the Nixonian war on drug policies have greatly contributed to the disproportionate incarceration of Black folks. Rates of violent crime did fall after these measures were put in place, but the negative effects of these policies still harm racial minorities in America today. When 70 million of them are released from prison, they're still felonized, and their families are in poverty because they need Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamps and SNAP programs. And every time someone can't get a job, they need rent subsidies. Every time they can't reach their full potential beyond the fact that they've been through the system is a problem. In fact, what they may have done becomes a life sentence. And here Donald Trump and Joe Biden, both Democrat and Republican, the Democratic Party of 1793, the party of Thomas Jefferson, became over time the party of states' rights. The party of states' rights then became the party of Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, the Democratic Party of slavery. And then in 1854, the party of Abraham Lincoln, stopping the expansion of slavery into the Western states. Over time, it lost its national focus. It lost the importance of protecting the freedmen in the South. It became the party of states' rights, local control. Jesse Helms, Strom Thurmond, the senator from West Virginia who was a notorious Ku Klux Klansman, Senator Byrd, the party of Donald Trump, Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Miss Boebert, The modern Republican Party is not the party of Lincoln. In fact, Daddy King Martin Luther King's father was a Republican out of commitment to Abraham Lincoln. He wasn't a Republican out of commitment to what's going on today. He'd be more aligned with where most African Americans are, most women are, most people fighting for their civil and human rights are. Maybe an independent, because the Democrat does not make good on its promises. Law and order. When we think through the buzzwords, the code words, welfare queen, they're eating the dogs and the cats, tougher police policies, lock them up, throw away the key, an executive order saying the Justice Department will fight for the death penalty if anyone kills a police officer. I assume that means also in self-defense. Whatever scuffle may ensue, I recommend you cooperate and listen to what the authorities are saying, but that's not been our history. Our history has been police brutality and taking the chains off, pulling the batons out, taking used military equipment that we, the taxpayers, paid for wars overseas, and then turning the used military equipment over to local police departments where they are now armed like little local armies. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. In the remaining half hour of our program, we will continue to march down history to the president's speech on law and order at the Department of Justice today. And once you see the history, I'm hoping it offers great clarity on the environment that we find ourselves in. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
KBLA Talk 1580 is an intervention. When we come forward, includes you. KBLA Talk 1580, turning pain into power.
I'm Amber Payton with 4 Things You Should Know with BIN News. The Trump administration may cut Columbia University's federal funding unless it overhauls its Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies Department and bans identity-concealing masks. Officials recently revoked $400 million in grants, citing failure to protect Jewish students. Black Maryland Governor Wes Moore announced a partnership with Serum to expand affordable prescription access in Maryland through Good Pill, a nonprofit pharmacy offering over 500 medications. Black Maryland Congressman Kwesi Mfume is praising a federal ruling reinstating government workers fired under President Trump, calling the dismissals un-American. He vows to keep fighting for public servants as ranking member of the Government Operations Subcommittee. And outgoing University of Illinois Chancellor Robert Jones, the first African-American to lead the school, will speak at the commencement ceremony on May 17th before becoming president of the University of Washington. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
Imagine a photograph of your favorite place in California. Then right in the middle of it, one piece of litter. Litter has no place in our lives, not one piece. Together, let's change that. Clean California. Zero litter is the goal. CleanCA.com.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
45 points from Luka Doncic was not enough to save the Lakers Thursday night in Milwaukee. The Lakers lost their third straight game, falling to the Bucks 126-109. It's obvious the Lakers are not the team that won 8 in a row and had a 20-4 run since mid-January. LeBron, Jackson Hayes, and Rui Hachimura have been out with injuries during the losing streak. The Lakers need to get healthy soon before they drop further in the Western Conference standings. They were number 2 a week ago. Now they're 4th. Before last night's game, a moment of silence was held in honor of Junior Bridgman, who played 10 of his 12 NBA seasons with the Bucks. Bridgman, a legendary and inspirational businessman, passed away Tuesday from an apparent heart attack. He was 71. Bucks players will wear a patch on their jerseys with Bridgman's name the rest of the season. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
I'm Reverend Gerald, the life coach. Is someone you love struggling with addiction and mental illness? Is improving your family's health important? Want to leave a legacy that your family can grow? Are you ready to enhance your perception of life experiences? Then wake up weekends at 7 a.m. with Urban Family Focus and get the wisdom, opportunity, resources, and motivation to live your best life. Join the conversation on Urban Family Focus Saturday and Sunday at 7 a.m.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
Many of the 39 BLM grassroots chapters across the nation are participating in this honoring of the memory of Breonna Taylor on the anniversary of her death. This BLMLA event is taking place on Sunday, March 16th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Norman Houston Park, 4800 South La Brea in Los Angeles, the park at the summit. For special parking options and more information, visit blmla.org or go to BLM Los Angeles on Instagram. Say her name, Breonna Taylor, and join us in loving on Black women. Happy Women's History Month from all of us at KBLA Talk 1580.
Hear that? That's the sound of your life. Perfectly imperfect. Beating in rhythm to the world you've created. But every time you drive after drinking, music gets drowned out. Your life sounds pretty great. Don't let a buzz ruin it. Buzz driving is drunk driving. Don't drive buzzed. A message from NHTSA and the Ad Council.
We've got a lot to talk about.
On January 7th, 2025, the Eaton Canyon Fire scorched Altadena, torching everything in its path. Homes, wealth, and legacy burned in one night. But will Altadena rise from the ashes? I'm James Farr. On the Conversation Live Altadena Rising, we're chronicling the recovery, the resilience, and justice for the nation. This is the show of record, unapologetically progressive. We're not blacking down. So join me, James Farr, on the Conversation Live, Altadena Rising, every Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific with the rebroadcast on Sunday at noon.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate loses and love wins.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show this coming Tuesday. 97-year-old founder of Afro Sheen, George Johnson, will be my very special guest on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. His new book, Afro Sheen, is a memoir about his life that is worth reading. Got a copy of it a couple of weeks ago, finished it in just a couple of days. And there are some extraordinary stories about the extraordinary people that his company came into contact with over the course of the life of that extraordinary business. We'll hear some of those stories from none other than Mr. George Johnson, Tuesday, March 18th, from 4 to 5 p.m. EST, 3 to 4 p.m. Central, and 1 to 2 p.m. PST right here on KBLA. Now back to this question of states' rights and law and order. In recent months, a few years ago, we saw the protests of George Floyd having culminated in a very ugly season of high-profile mass shootings, killing of African Americans in their own homes, in their own space, over a bag of Skittles. And then we saw with our own eyes, a police officer put his knee in the neck of an African American male that led to a summer of resistance. And many companies across this country decided that they wanted to do something about it. So they began investing in something called diversity, equity, and inclusion, and creating more opportunities for African Americans. The very DEI that President Trump is coming after right now, one institution at a time, dismantling it throughout the entire federal government and encouraging the private sector with the force and power of the Justice Department to eliminate DEI programs in the private sector. Trump has claimed numerous times that this violence is due to Democratic state and local officials that refuse to enforce law and order. His response has been to strongly encourage them to call the National Guard or for officials to be harder on the protesters. Trump has been clear that he supports law enforcement as it currently stands. He's increasing funding and with suggestions for minor reforms and increase the amount of military equipment available for officials. However, data shows that the police violence happens at a much higher rate to minorities than to white Americans. Joe Biden's stance was a bit different, and he shifted it over the years. The aforementioned 1994 crime bill was championed by Biden. This law did contribute to the mass incarceration of Black Americans that still occurs today, and he could have done something about it with the pardon power. Just like Donald Trump pardoned 1,500 insurrectionists. Joe Biden made the conscious decision that men and women he locked up from the 1994 crime bill, who paid their debt to society in full, were not worthy of a pardon. And some of them committed the exact same offenses that his own son committed. And members of his family must have committed in order for them to have received a pardon in the waning minutes of his administration. Considering the origins and the deployment of the utterance of the word law and order, it is clear that this slogan is used to tap into the fears surrounding protests, crime, non-white people, which subsequently justifies legislation that targets non-white communities. While law and order has been a big talking point for President Trump, it is clear that Democrats and Republicans have used law and order as a framework and a means for getting elected to public office. No one's hands are clean when it comes to us. I was listening to Pastor Jamal Bryant the other day, and he said in this environment, it's very difficult for prophetic ministers like Dr. Bryant to call civil rights marches, to call protests. Because in the 60s, we actually, well, I was only 5 years old. I was born in 1965. But in the 60s, James Orange, Reverend Lawson, C.T. Vivian, James Bevel were engaged in the training of nonviolent protesters before they would protest. In other words, they were trained to absorb the blows. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. They were spit on. They were spat at. People threw grits at them and eggs and poured milkshakes on top of their heads and pushed them and got in their faces and shouted at them. And they were taught to just sit there, so that the behavior of the antagonistic parties could be projected and seen all over the world. That behavior embarrassed America on the world stage. And there was nothing America could do about it because it was so brutal, it was so unwarranted, that every force in the universe that has an action has an equal and opposite reaction, just like the Canadians and the Europeans and other countries are now offering tariffs because what? Once we offered tariffs, Donald Trump's tariffs, they responded. Every force, every action in the universe, one of Newton's laws, has an equal and opposite reaction. That's why diplomacy and getting along between nations matters. And we're looking at the stock markets tank as a result of action and reaction. So our leaders historically have anticipated what the reaction is going to be to our action. That's what Jamal said on this program. He said, Jesse, I'm reluctant to lead marches because in this environment, the reaction could be so violent and devastating to our nonviolent activity that it's best for us right now to just engage consumer boycotts. We don't know what the police are going to do. And we don't know if a police officer shoots our people in a nonviolent protest, whether or not the federal government will tell the state to stay out of it. The federal government wants to take the case, and we don't know if Donald Trump is going to pardon the police officer. Hence, Elon Musk says that Derek Chauvin, who had his knee in George Floyd's neck, should be pardoned by Donald Trump. Fortunately, the state of Minnesota has him on state criminal charges, and he won't be coming home anytime soon. But after he finishes his federal time, he has to finish state time. To that extent, states' rights covered us. But what happens when a governor is in cahoots with the president and the attorney general of a state is in cahoots with the president, and they say, we're not going to charge the local police officer who violated someone's civil rights because the federal government's going to charge them? Then the federal government goes through the process, charges them, and Donald Trump says, you know, I'm on the side of the police. I backed the blue. You weren't supposed to be marching that day. So I'm going to pardon the guy or the gal. And then you can't try them twice. Double jeopardy. And if the pardon is full, complete, absolute, and unconditional, it is as if it never happened in the first place. That's why I fight for the full, complete, absolute, and unconditional pardon of millions of Americans who have paid their debt to society in full. If it's good enough for Hunter Biden, it's good enough for your son, it's good enough for Jesse Jackson's son, it's good enough for everybody's son. But it's all the consequences of the buzzword law and order. You've not heard a law and order speech that comes after the Klan, or ranchers who are taking the law into their own hands and shooting men and women and families across the border who are trying to become American citizens and are seeking a better way of life. You've not heard of law and order when it comes to anyone in the MAGA base. You only hear of law and order when it comes to us. And that's the history of law and order from Barry Goldwater to the present. When we come forward, I will share with you the history from Goldwater to the present in our final segment. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
A safe place to go loud. A great place for progressive politics. KBLA Talk 1580.
LA property owners, join us to house more veterans. By accepting veteran housing vouchers, you will receive guaranteed rent while providing a stable and safe home that will make a difference in their lives. Help house our heroes. Expedited processing and dedicated support for property owners is available because every veteran deserves a place to call home. Email houseourvets at lacity.org, HOUSEOURVETS at lacity.org for more information.
We've got a lot to talk about.
On January 7th, 2025, the Eaton Canyon fire scorched Altadena, torching everything in its path. Homes, wealth, and legacy burned in one night. But will Altadena rise from the ashes? I'm James Farr. On the Conversation Live Altadena Rising, we're chronicling the recovery, the resilience, and justice for the nation. This is the show of record, unapologetically progressive. We're not blacking down. So join me, James Farr, on the Conversation Live, Altadena Rising, every Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific with the rebroadcast on Sunday at noon.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Imagine a Los Angeles where everyone can thrive, where communities have access to the resources they need to succeed. That's the vision of Detours Mentoring Group, Inc. They're dedicated to improving life in LA County by providing educational support, employment assistance, and spaces for community engagement. By 2050, they want LA to be the best place to connect, create, learn, live, and play. They're working toward an education system that's well-resourced and culturally responsive, becoming a hub for artists and innovators, and making sure everyone has access to healthy food, quality healthcare, and safe housing. It's about building a future where we all have the chance to succeed. We invite you to learn more about their mission and get involved with Detours Mentoring Group, Inc. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
I can't believe how spotless my floors look after using the Swiffer Power Mop. No more dragging around a heavy mop and messy bucket. Now I get the same deep clean without all the work. Thanks to the powerful solution and scrubbing pad of the Swiffer Power Mop, dirt and grime don't stand a chance, and I don't break a sweat. Mic drop. Mop drop.
Swiffer Power Mop. Swiffer Power Mop.
A smarter way to mop. Try it or your money back.
Imagine a photograph of your favorite place in California, then right in the middle of it, one piece of litter. Litter has no place in our lives, not one piece. Together, let's change that. Clean California. Zero litter is the goal. CleanCA.com.
LA property owners, join us to house more veterans. By accepting veteran housing vouchers, you will receive guaranteed rent while providing a stable and safe home that will make a difference in their lives. Help house our heroes. Expedited processing and dedicated support for property owners is available because every veteran deserves a place to call home. Email houseourvets@lacity.org, HOUSEOURVETS @lacity.org for more information.
We're not for everybody, but we're for everybody. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. The conscious modern-day conservative political resistance movement began in 1964 with Mr. Conservative, Barry Goldwater. At the height of the civil rights movement, he emphasized states' rights and local control, and he won a mere 52 electoral votes, all of them from a solidly conservative Deep South. In 1968, conservative Southern Democrat George Wallace ran as a third-party candidate on the American Independent Party ticket, making a rather unsophisticated racial appeal. And Richard Nixon's campaign, using a slightly more subtle Southern strategy, with the racial code words of law and order in response to the 1967 and 68 Black urban uprisings. In 1972, both Nixon and Wallace used the racially charged issue of anti-busing, and Wallace was shot and wounded in the middle of that campaign in Laurel, Maryland, which consigned him to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He tried to run again as a Democrat in 1976, but was defeated by Jimmy Carter in the Florida primary, and his quest for the presidency was over. Governor Jimmy Carter, a great man as president of the United States, had to reconcile his own racial challenges with things that he had said early in his career, code words to become governor of the state of Georgia. In 1980, Ronald Reagan's racial appeal was apparent as he launched his campaign from Philadelphia, Mississippi. The same place, as I've noted, where 2 Jews and a Black were murdered in June of 1964 in a campaign to register Blacks to vote. And he used the stereotype of welfare queen and young bucks to appeal to white voters. George Bush and Al Gore used Willie Horton in 1988. And Clinton used Sister Souljah in 1992. In 2000, Bush used a straight-out appeal to conservatism and strict constructionism, meaning interpret the Constitution of the United States before the human rights amendments are added to the Constitution. Strict constructionism. The Bill of Rights, the original Republic, all championed states' rights. But if slavery is a states' rights can never be human rights. So the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment read together says that America is on the path to new and still yet undiscovered human rights. The path to God-endowed human rights comes after slavery. And African Americans found themselves in a chattel form of slavery. The 13th Amendment eliminated chattel slavery, slavery on the basis of our personhood. But because states' rights protects other forms of slavery, you have to amend the Constitution to get out of states' rights slavery. And that's why women are fighting for an equal rights amendment to the Constitution. Because seeking rights one state at a time is not a human rights system. That is a separate and unequal system. So you can go to this state and you can have an abortion. You can't do it in this state, we'll lock you up. Got to go to this state if you've been raped or incest to have an abortion. But down here, you're going to have that baby. States' rights. As opposed to having a national equal rights amendment to the Constitution, guaranteeing that women can make decisions for themselves because they're grown, because they're adults, because we respect their personhood, and we don't discriminate against their gender. Turning women's rights over to the states, turning education over to the states, turning healthcare over to the states, turning civil rights over to the states is a guarantee of a separate and unequal justice system. A guarantee. And that's what Brother Diallo Brooks talked about on our program yesterday, about the need to have a central coordinating system so that the disabled are not discriminated against. After Bush's appeal, both parties used crime and welfare in the public's mind. They tied it to Black people. And Donald Trump did away with all the racial whistles. He replaced it with a foghorn. He got a microphone, got some PV speakers, hooked it up, turned it up as loud as he could, and he said, I'm not going to use code words like welfare queen. I'm not going to use code words like Black youth. No, he's just going to tell you who he is and mean what he says when he says it. And when he says, I want you to shove someone in a police car and hit him in the head when you do, or issues a shoot to kill order in the middle of a nonviolent protest, which is possible, and then offer pardons to the law enforcement officials who carry out that order. So when, again, Pastor Jamal Bryant and Pastor Otis Moss III, and when Teresa Hort Owens and Dr. Alexis Felder and Dr. Thompson and these serious thinking, nonviolent theologians and activists come together and say, we have to have a protest in the context of the understanding of the prevailing politic that is dominating the ether of our system. We've never had a president like this. We've never had a court system and a prosecutorial system like this. And the approach to the buzzwords are part of a historical evolution of the English language. They don't have to call you, they don't have to ask you to pick cotton anymore. They just want you to dribble basketballs. Nobody else can get into the college. But the number one recruitment mechanism for predominantly white colleges and universities will still be the football team. It generates billions of dollars for these institutions. It will still be Basketball, the best basketball players in the country, not all of them are Rhodes Scholars when they get accepted to these institutions, these big schools. There's just absolutely no one is going to convince me that someone who has played, that there are many scholars who play basketball, but not all of them are Rhodes Scholars and capable of getting into some Division I schools. No. I can tell when the man puts the microphone in front of them and asks them a question, and the first thing out their mouth is, "Hi, Mom," and then can't answer the question that he asked them because, yeah. How did he get in college? He got into college on a scholarship program that makes them competitive in the NCAAs and in Division I and Division II basketball and football and baseball. So we're not going to touch that. It is easier to be president of the United States, statistically speaking, than it is to be a college basketball player. That's how many people are trying to get on the team. And that's how aggressive the recruitment systems are of the big schools to find the best athletes to play for these teams. They have booster clubs and they have people reading local newspapers and they're looking for somebody 6'6". They're looking for someone 7'2". They're looking for 8th graders, 9th graders. The booster clubs then call the coach and says, "Hey, University of this, University of that, University of Illinois, University of Georgia, University of Virginia. Hey, we got a star over here. Now, we don't know what their grades are or whether or not the test they took qualifies them to get into the school, but we do know they aggressively recruited them. But when it came to finding someone who understands science and mathematics and wants to be an engineer or an architect, or they want to study journalism, or when it comes to the rest of us, we're DEI. And when we resist the policy on the college campuses, the White House is now demanding that mayors and college presidents break down the protests that take place. And if they need help, call the Department of Justice. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. In this hour, we have been discussing the history of law and order in light of the President of the United States campaign rally at the Department of Justice. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You've been listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Amber Payne.